what we're planning is first that Tanya will give a talk about some drought management plans and strategies. And then we've allotted a little bit of time for discussion, maybe with fewer people, a little less discussion. And then Deborah has agreed to profile very briefly a number of drought monitoring tools that can be useful to keep an eye on. And then we have some time for Q&A there as well. So I guess without further ado, I guess it makes sense for you to jump in, Tanya, with our reduced crowd. You know, maybe we'll even all be able to hop off a little early and get some supper or something like that.
Sounds good. Thank you. And so, yeah, sorry, I can't actually share my slides because I'm just going to talk into my phone here. So we're just going to talk. So I'm just going to take a few minutes. I wanted to talk about some basic concepts related to planning for drought. And then really I'm looking forward to the discussion time, and we can talk about how these things either do or don't resonate given the operations and the challenges that you all are facing. So again, my name is Tanya Haig. One of the things I didn't say in my introduction is my background's actually in sociology. It's not in climate. But I've worked over the past 10 years or so with ranchers across the Great Plains and into the Southwest region to develop strategies for planning for drought. So a lot of people ask is, why do I need a plan for drought? And sometimes that discussion comes up in the context of building resilient operations. Like, our focus should be on building resilient operations. And so they say, well, we should be doing that. We shouldn't be thinking about reactively what we're going to do during drought. But as George and everybody will be able to attest, drought happens to the most resilient ranch operations. And our thinking is that a drought response plan really should complement and be thought of as really a part of building the resilience of an operation. So before our webinar tonight, I had shared, I think Leah shared some fact sheets with you all. There were two pagers of describing rancher operations. They had talked with us about their drought plans, what they do during drought. One of them was the John Welch Cattle Company in Southeast Colorado, and one of them was the Daybreak Ranch in Central South Dakota. And one of the things that really comes clear talking with both of them is that they do a lot of work to build their ranch's resilience, but they also really put a lot of focus on putting together their response plans for drought. So one of the things that they would say that a response plan gives you is the ability to know when they actually need to take action, when they've reached a level of drought severity, or when the drought has lasted long enough that they need to take action. So, and one of the things I want to talk about is that a response plan really seems to help with addressing a lot of different sources of uncertainty that a manager deals with during drought. So, when you're making a decision, when drought is starting, I mean, managers might go through different cognitive processes, but generally we go through this process where first we're starting to become aware that there's a problem, and then we're deciding, like, okay, well, is this actually a risk for me? And if it is a risk for me, what should I do? And then once I've decided what I should do, then I have to decide how am I going to do it. So there's kind of all these steps along the cognitive decision-making process. And at all of those stages, there's all this uncertainty. There's uncertainty about whether drought is really here to stay, how quickly drought might become a problem, what the impacts of the drought might be, whether disaster aid might be on the way, how markets might respond to the situation, how feasible the strategies are that you would like to undertake, and how to actually get it done. So, so these are the things that we think a plan can help with. And a response plan is really a way to think through a number of questions before drought happens. And some of the key questions are, first of all, for my operation, when do I really need to respond to drought? So what time of year should I be responding to drought? At what severity of drought do I really need to take action? Thinking through that ahead of time. And then the second thing is, if I do need to decide to respond, what is the best course of action for my operation? what animals should I be thinking about destocking, or which pastures should I be addressing? And how should I actually go about getting this done? Should I do early weaning? Should I sell off some cull cows? You know, what are really the best strategies for me? So a response plan really lays out the if what happens, then what do I do? And tries to lay that as much out ahead of time as possible. So in a plan that I can't show you, but I'm happy to show you where to find it. For example, in South Central Kansas, one of the ranchers that we work with says that April 1st, June 15th, August 15th, and November 1st, I think, are the key dates that he really needs to make decisions. And on those dates, he has it kind of laid out in his mind. If I've gotten less than this much precipitation on this date, then this is where my stocking rate should be, and this is what I'm probably going to try to do with my herd. And he's got it really well laid out. I can tell you where to find that online. And so that's kind of the then. If there's this much precipitation or less, then this is what I'm going to do. So we've done some follow-up with ranchers, because obviously there's a lot of different types of drought plans, probably as many different times as there are operations. We've done some follow-up to see what having a plan actually, what effect it has had in some past droughts. We were able to do a survey after the 2016 drought in the Northern Plains region, and we found that ranchers who had a drought plan tended to begin destocking their herds earlier in the year than those who didn't. So they reached a point where they were able to take decisive action a little earlier than some other operations. And after the drought, they felt like they saw less harm to their range productivity than ranchers who didn't say they had a plan. In talking with the ranchers, like John and Jim, who we highlighted in those 2-pagers, some of the things that they really talked about when they talked about their experience in the 2012 drought, the 2016, 2017 drought, is that they felt like they faced less decision-making angst and uncertainty because they had their plan, and they really felt like their operations recovered faster and recovered better after the drought. So that's really kind of the heart of the drought plan. The way that the drought plan really needs and fits with what Deb Bathke is going to talk about a little later in this webinar is for an effective drought plan, you really need to both understand what your own important precipitation months are, your forage growth periods, but then have some way to monitor that, whether you're doing your own monitoring on the ranch, but also whether you're using some of the new and really good tools that are out there that might help you monitor so that you know when you're reaching a point that you need to take action. And so that's something that Deb is going to talk a little bit more about. So again, ultimately what we're hoping is that by developing a plan, and many people have it written down, not everybody, but really kind of fleshed out beforehand. By having that plan, you're able to think through all those sources of uncertainty before drought occurs, so that when the drought actually occurs, the manager knows what they'd like to do and when in their operation. So when I can hop back on, I'm going to put into the chat box a couple of email addresses. One of them is for the National Drought Mitigation Center's Managing Drought Risk on the Ranch website. It has a lot of resources for thinking through the process of actually putting together a drought plan. There's also features of some different ranchers who shared their drought plans with us, and the couple of 2-pagers that I sent out were 2 of the ranchers who were featured on the website, so you can actually read a little bit more about them on the website. And we're actually in the process of updating some different parts of this website, but there's really a wealth of information there. And I see Deb put that link in, so thanks, Deb. The other link that I'll put in the website, you may already be aware of it, but the University of Arizona has done some great work on drought planning that is really specifically relevant to people who are grazing on public lands. And in those cases where building relationships, having permits ahead of time are a much bigger part of the process than for ranchers who are working primarily on private lands. The University of Arizona Drought and Grazing Tools is what it's called. There's a whole toolkit located on the website. And one of the things you can download is called A Guide to Co-Developing Plans for Livestock Grazing on Southwest National Forests. And so that might be something that is of interest and is an interesting resource to folks. So those are really the highlights I wanted to hit. I hope, I'm looking forward to hear how this resonates with our mentors on the call, and where some of this work maybe could be expanded through working more in the Southwest. So that is all I have for you tonight. Thank you. Sorry about my slides. I will send them out. I'm happy to send them out to everybody after.
Right. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Yeah.
And so we have some time now for discussion, and we do actually have a few new people joining. So what do you all think? Do we have time to have some of our new attendees introduce themselves? So that would be great. So unfortunately, you all have missed everyone else's introductions. But Peter, I was wondering if you could introduce yourself.
I think both that phone number and the square that says Peter, I think those are both Peter. I'm
Okay.
not sure if he's having trouble with audio.
It'll be *6 to unmute, Peter. If you need to unmute, it's a *6.
Looks like he's trying.
Sorry about that. Yeah, took me a sec there. But I'm Peter. I am on the Inderland Ranch in Big Timber, Montana, apprenticing there. Was there anything else you wanted me to add on there?
No, that's great. Thank you. And I think, yeah, so yeah, both of those are you. So
Yeah.
Nice to meet
Yeah,
you.
sorry. I keep popping in and out here on the video, and the audio is unreliable. So
Yeah.
I'm not the most tech savvy person, unfortunately, but glad to be on the call here in multiple forms, I guess.
Right. Okay, so and I guess I will go ahead and turn that over. I'm blanking on, Leah, were you facilitating this discussion section?
No, I think someone else has the facilitation questions, but I can
Right.
just butt in a little bit here to say that George and Julie, thank you so much for being on the call. And Katie, sorry if I'm stealing your introduction a little bit, but part of why the group wanted to make sure that there was a mentor here was to also hear from your lived experience of growing up and living and working on and managing a ranch your whole life, and how some of these things resonate with you and how you've learned to manage through drought.
Well, I can definitely touch on that.
And I think Katie may have some specific questions, but if you
Okay,
want to
well,
take it away.
Yeah.
Take it away, George.
Yeah, one of the things she was talking about there a few minutes ago with all these different things that we can do and having a drought plan ahead of time and all those kind of things. And we've done all that, but really for me, living through these droughts and these times is I get in my own way more than anything else. And I've learned at 67 years old, I kind of know myself. And one of the first things I tend to do is I go into denial. First of all, I believe that it's going to rain pretty soon and that it will, things will be better. But there's a point at which that denial starts to break down into self-doubt, and then it can turn into depression. And that is a really dangerous time for a rancher. If you become depressed and you have a lot of self-doubt about your plans and we're supposed to know how to do all this. We've been doing it for all these years and we have all the answers. And that's really we go through, I think, some of the same personal struggle that anybody does. We may have had experienced it before, and by that I mean I've recognized these things, but it seems like I still go through those emotional things because I feel like all my work as a range manager all these years and soil health and all of the things that we've done and all the things that we can show we've done right doesn't matter when it doesn't rain for years. And we didn't get any rain in 2018 on our rangeland. We had 103% snowpack of the winter between 2018 and 2019 we didn't get any. And then this year we got no precipitation hardly at all again. So we have 2 years back to back already built up on that rangeland with basically no rain on warm season grasses. So they're dormant and dying, and none of my pasture management would make any difference. And so, of course, we destocked during the middle of the winter and we moved our cow herd. One of the things about being in ranching is that animals, if it weren't for fences, animals would migrate. They're smart enough to do that. And so our property rights and our belief system around what we own and what we have kind of gets in our way sometimes. So we've learned to migrate just like the animals would do. And so we've survived a couple of these really serious droughts by migrating to different areas and destocking and cleaning up the herd. You don't haul animals that you don't want around very much. And so we do all those things. But really the thing I would like to point out is that mental health aspect of this is really important because drought it never goes away. It's always there. It's not like a hurricane or some fire or something that's bad and then it's over and then you can see the other side of it. It just sits there, and we're still in it. I'm already thinking about next year what we're going to do even if it does snow without a rain next summer, and some way for that rangeland to get some real recovery, then we won't put cattle on it until it's ready.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think that one of the tools that doesn't get talked about a lot, but has been probably the most important tool for us when drought has hit, has been relationships. Is that we haven't ever had to destock to the level of a lot of other people because we know people. And instead of sort of closing down when things got hard, we sort of reached out. And so we've been pretty fortunate to get leases that have conservation easements on them or do restoration projects in another state and be actually paid to bring our cattle somewhere where there was feed. Or right now, most of our mother herd is on another mentor operation. And we found that pasture because of the connections we have through the Quivira Coalition NAP program. So I think having good management and having a reputation as being conscientious managers helps you have those relationships. But what's really saved us in drought has been relationship, has been the capacity to move somewhere else so that we don't have to destroy our own landscape.
I'd also like to just share something quickly. As an apprentice at George and Julie's ranch, and this is not, it's not a criticism of the wisdom surrounding drought planning that's being offered. It's just an opportunity. I think practices, you almost get, it seems like you're almost hamstrung by, if you have certain certifications, et cetera, and your practices are regenerative in a drought situation, and your business plan is based around sales through those, market avenues. The kind of the recommendations to, for example, you can find, more pasture. Well, it has to be certified organic. So that already is going to limit your potential your potential selections. And then also, I mean, I was thinking about like early weaning. Well, if you're like, we're GAP certified, so that takes those animals out of that certification. So, I mean, I guess like as an apprentice, I've really like this season have learned like, and we've really been exposed to the kind of rocks and hard places that you can find yourself between, and that George and Julie are speaking to, where, you know, you try and be as kind of potent and effective of a land manager as possible and livestock manager, but in drought, I mean, even with these tools, it can be extremely difficult to find a solution that works financially, works from an animal welfare perspective, and works from a land health perspective. So,
Pam, I'm glad you leaned forward. I noticed Ian joined us, and Ian, it's an all-comers welcome kind of conversation. This group is small enough, and we are the Drought Learning Network. So the goal here tonight is to facilitate learning among all who are on the call. So as you're thinking up additional questions, and George and Julie thinking up additional things to offer to the conversation, noticing that there's a generational gap here. George, I'm curious to hear from you. What's some advice that, I heard you mention that you'd come up in the ranching world. What's some advice you heard from old timers that still rings true with you today, or that you just regard as bunk today? Maybe you have some advice that you heard from old timers that fits into both those buckets.
Well, I don't know. I'm the oldest old timer around, I think, you know, getting that way. But, you know, my dad and my grandfather, first of all, they hadn't seen these kind of droughts. You know, when Europeans came to the Southwest, we basically settled here during some of the wettest years in the last 700 or 800. We've done dendrochronology samples all around the San Luis Valley and monitored what the weather was like back 1,500 years. And the drought of 2002 was the driest in 700. But the time period when Europeans came here was the wettest in that whole time period. And so we set up the Rio Grande Compact between the states and our water systems and everything based on wet times. And so our civilization is built on a climate that not only may be drastically changing rapidly for many reasons, but it's never been really like we think it is. And so, it was just the drought of the 50s was a big drought. I remember that, walking down the road in the dust and the smell of the country and the way that things were when it was dry then. But I was, 5 or 9, 10 years old. And I don't think the old timers really have had to deal with this kind of drought. I've dealt with it seriously most of my life, but my dad never really had to deal with that.
I know there are others on the call who might have questions to ask. Are there others that want to pick these good brains that are available for all to learn from this evening?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple of questions for George and Julie and others, if you want to chime in. I really appreciated what you said about mental health and the mental health aspects and the pressure. And that's something that I think about a lot, as my job is to work with farmers and ranchers and foresters across the Southwest, and we're getting hotter and drier, and it's already really challenging. And so I wonder, and this is probably a really hard question, but I wonder if you have any suggestions or thoughts about supporting mental health in this era.
You want to mute it?
It's
Okay.
here, let's go.
I think it's really challenging. I didn't grow up in agriculture. I grew up in Southern California in a family of artists. And so like going to therapy and talking about your feelings was second nature. And then 20 years ago, I married a rancher. So I think it is a community of people that are still really trapped in the misconceptions that exist around the fact that asking for help is actually an act of courage and strength. It's not an act of, shame. But I think we're really, I know the Ag Commissioner here in Colorado, Kate Greenberg, this has been one of her main missions, has been, how do we come up with a tool? Like a call line doesn't work if people don't pick up the phone. And the more depressed people are, the less capable they are of being proactive. So, I mean, I think we have to start before we get this bad. I think that we need to figure out a way to somehow normalize talking about feelings and mistakes and challenges, in K through 12 education. It was somehow, and that's a huge cultural shift to make. I don't think there are any easy answers, and we're seeing the consequences of that again. I think for us, what we've realized is, even in the pandemic, is we had a lot of reporters reach out to us early on, sort of saying, well, your life probably hasn't changed a lot because you're always isolated. And while that's true, I think the truth of it is that the little bit of social contact and social interaction you have as a rural person is all the more precious because it's limited. It's just like rain. Every single drop matters. And so I think one of the things that we did was try to find that the pot of people that were practicing the same protocols we were doing, and then make a point of sitting on the porch with them. And it's amazing what a difference that makes. So I think if there's some way to encourage people to just, like, two people, like everybody's probably got one or two people. And try to find a support that's that simple and that local.
Thank you. I know that was a hard question, but I appreciated that you brought it up. And I noticed that you also talked about community, basically. Building relationships. I thought of that as community. And I think that that's kind of ties in some way. So I'll keep thinking about it. Thanks for sharing that.
And George, I'm thinking back to what you said at the start, that, there are various kind of phases to the psychological aspect of drought: denial, self-doubt, depression. And it occurs to me in a visual way in my mind that kind of walks hand in hand with trigger dates. So I'm wondering, do you also see that in your mind? And maybe what are your trigger dates that could help avoid some of those, hitting some of those psychological phases that are pretty unsavory?
Well, because we do a lot of monitoring and we look at the grass every day, where every step on our land, where we're looking at the land, or whether I'm driving down the road, I'm reading the landscape constantly and trying to assess in my own mind and with my own experience what it is I'm seeing, and try to put aside what I want for what I really see. And that's the point. That trigger point is when I start to realize that this is not going to get better. I need to start taking action. And so, first of all, if it looks like I'm going to damage my land by putting cattle out on it, then that's a trigger point right there. If I can see that here I am, I'm back grazing this pasture again because I'm out of feed. When we put animals in a paddock, and we have a plan, if we have to move out of that paddock before the grass is gone, or before our plan says we were going to, and we overestimated how much pasture's in there. And I always do that. I'm an optimist. I have to be, kind of, but so it's really disappointing when I go down there and I can see that we're going to run out of pasture 1 or 2 or 3 days before we're supposed to move to the next pasture. Or depending on some pastures, it's a matter of hours. We do some very intensive grazing where half a day makes a huge amount of difference because of the high stocking rate. So when you see that, it starts to build up, and I don't let that go on very long before I start to make alternative plans. And I may go across that landscape once and graze like I want to. And if I have to come back before those plants are ready for that second graze, then that's a real trigger point right there. That's the time when, all right, we've got to destock, we've got to change, or we got to find someplace else. We've got to do something to break this cycle that we're trapped in here on this particular piece of land. And so we have a lot of options, and we're very good at leasing land and certifying land organic that wasn't certified before, as long as it hasn't, you know, we kind of know what to look for and how to do those things, but we're always ready to do that. And it's based primarily on what the plants need. And then the animals and then us come after that, kind of in that order.
The thing I think I'd add to that is that I think George and I are I think one of the things we have that supports us in dealing with drought is the fact that we're pretty good at disagreeing with each other and getting pissed off, but working it through. So if one of us is being overly optimistic, the other one can be the truth teller, or vice versa. And I think that actually plays into the mental health piece as well, is that I think a lot of times, particularly for male ranchers and farmers, you know, our society tells them that they have to have all the answers, and they're supposed to be a strong leader, and they're not supposed to say when they have doubt. And I think George is able to be very transparent about the places where he has questions and uncertainty, and not only share that in our relationship and co-managing the ranch, but also with our apprentices. And so I think that one of the things that helps us get real is the fact that we're supposedly training young people. And if we aren't honest with ourselves about what we're seeing and what we're doing and the choices we're making, then we're doing them a disservice. And I think that their mere presence catches us and helps us be better managers. And it's one of the things that I think is a great benefit to being a mentor, is the way that those young eyes and their dedication to learn means that you need to do your job well.
Well, I see both Sam and Noelle leaning into the phone, so hopefully they have a final question to kind of wrap up this segment of tonight's gathering. And no pressure. I just saw you leaning forward.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say that Julie kind of captured it, but I felt like, you know, just from the apprentice perspective, the transparency really made a huge difference. And I think that we are kind of able to, I mean, obviously we are unequal shareholders, you know, in this operation, but I would like to think that we are all shareholders, like we're invested in this place and feel strongly and like deep, like emotionally about it and the animals. And so I guess like carrying that as a group, I mean, again, George and Julie bear most of that weight, but that was meaningful to, I think I can speak for us. Like, I mean, well, that was meaningful for us because it's stressful regardless, because there's uncertainty and you come into a place and you see that things are going, you know, there's the kind of projected plan that we have at the beginning of the season, and then there's the way things actually kind of unfold, and that, you know, once things kind of start going off script, it's, if it weren't for the transparency and like being fully, you know, aware of kind of what the stakes are, what the thought process is from both George and Julie, who are obviously very experienced managers, like, you know, from our perspective, I think that there would be like a tremendous, you know, amount of additional stress, because it is so uncertain. And, you know, regardless of whether you have a plan or not, I mean, you're kind of acting in the moment. And so that was very meaningful for us. Yeah, that's my thought. I don't know.
I guess it's a question kind of to anyone really, but it's more along the lines of what Emily was talking about with support. Like, how do you support ranchers and families and people going through drought when they're in that, you know, triple D, denial, you know, doubt, and then depression, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's really hard when you don't have an outlet. I mean, your community is very important, but like, say, for example, this is what we've kind of been talking about is, you know, we probably have to destock, and that means selling your oldest cows who are 12, 14 years old, who have given you, you know, healthy calves and pretty much done everything you want them to do. And then you have to bring them to a sale barn and you get nothing for them. And that was what Sam was kind of just talking to me about before. And it's, you know, how do you make that decision and make peace with that when you know deep down in your heart you do everything you can every single day for this animal to, you know, give them a happy, healthy life. So I think that's part of the doubt and the depression is you put so much care and love and effort into your animals, into your land, and then you feel like you have no way out besides kind of options that you wouldn't choose for, you know, your biggest enemy. I don't know. I guess it would be great to have more support in times where ranchers feel like they're at their lowest and they have no one. And I don't know where you find that.
Well, to piggyback on that, I think it's like, not to dominate this, but I think that there's like this really inextricable link between drought and like environmental resiliency and food system resiliency, because we're talking about how to reduce stocking rates, how to make an operation more resilient, both like in terms of stewardship and in terms of, you know, financial realities of running a ranch where the margins are already extremely narrow. And if you're already hamstrung by the like national cattle market, and, you know, maybe you get a better price sending the animal to slaughter, but you can't get USDA slots and everyone is trying to slaughter animals at the same time. I mean, I know with like COVID and with this drought, you know, USDA slots in Colorado are booked through next spring. So you don't have that option. So I guess just drawing attention, I think it's important to recognize that drought is not an isolated phenomenon and that all of this stuff is interconnected. And there's a whole like infrastructure and logistical reality around ranching, whether you're, you know, you consider yourself a regenerative rancher or a, you know, you're more conventional, whatever, but, you know, the cards are kind of stacked against you in terms of being able to be that flexible and dynamic where you can, you know, you're still throwing a, you know, it's still a Hail Mary, you know, even if you're trying to get ahead of the market by destocking early and setting these dates, you're still assuming that you can, when like this year, sale barns weren't open because there's a pandemic. I mean, you know, there's just so much uncertainty, and I think it really calls to, you know, brings to the fore the need for real systemic change that creates a more resilient, robust food system that is less, you know, maybe like, you know, perhaps, you know, less centralized, you know, a little bit more stable, where, you know, the producers, regardless of, you know, their practices, et cetera, have the ability to react to these stressors. Yeah, sorry.
Wanted to thank everyone. I kind of hate to interrupt this really great and honest discussion, but I thought it might be good if we could move on to part 2, unless people really excited to continue this on. But Deborah's got some good information for us about some drought monitoring tools, things that maybe can provide some, advanced warning and things in addition to the trigger points that you all have on your own.
So I agree, Steph. Hey everybody, it's Katie again. I've been very quiet and I've been listening very carefully to what people have had to say, and I must say I'm very moved, and I'm also energized. I want to help do something about this. Maybe help people develop channels where they can talk to each other, especially during these times of social distancing. So I think we need to put stars around what we just discussed and make a plan to move forward on how we can help in the future. So I just wanted to mention that. Thanks, Steph.
Great. So I guess Deborah will kind of turn the show over to you now.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And I would like, can everyone hear me? Okay, thumbs up. I would like to thank all of you for sharing your stories and experiences. They were moving, and like Katie, I just want to try and help find solutions for you. And I just hate interrupting the great discussion to talk about drought maps and data, but that's part of the program. So I'll go ahead and get started with that. So drought is an inevitable part of our climate, and agricultural producers, perhaps more than anyone in our society, know the toll that drought can take on the economy and on mental health. And Tanya talked a bit about plans and moving away from this reactionary response approach to drought to something that's more proactive. And drought monitoring is a critical layer of that plan. It provides the foundation for any drought plan. You can't manage your responses and your actions for drought if you don't know that you're in a drought. And so what I'm going to be talking about with you today are 4 different tools or products that you can use. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them you may have not, to help you identify when you're in a drought. The first product that I'm going to talk about is the US Drought Monitor, or the USDM for short. And I am one of the authors for the map. This is a weekly map and a narrative that depicts the current status of drought in the United States. It was developed and is produced in partnership by the National Drought Mitigation Center, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So lots of acronyms. It uses 5 classifications. Abnormally dry, which is shown in yellow, is used to represent areas that are going into and out of drought. And the other 4 increasingly warmer colors represent 4 levels of drought that range from moderate drought, or D1, which is shown in beige, to exceptional drought, or D4, which is shown in the maroon color that you see there. If you look at the map, you may also notice some letters sprinkled across it, an S and an L, or a combination of S and L together. These represent the relative time scale of the drought, and they stand for short and long term. So over the kind of 4 corners type of area, you see that S and L, and what that means is that as George said, you have been experiencing drought for a long time, for at least 2 years, but you're also seeing some of the shorter term impacts, and the deficits in moisture are continuing to still occur. Let's see. The US Drought Monitor, so this map, to get a complete picture of drought, it combines multiple types of data so that we can see where deficits are occurring at kind of different points in the water cycle. The data that we look at generally falls into the categories that you see here. So obviously we include precipitation, so rain and snow, but we also look at measurements of stream flow, lake levels, reservoir storage, soil moisture, groundwater levels where it's available, soil moisture, vegetation health indices, and evaporative demand. Because the map delineates between short and long-term drought conditions, we look at all of this data across multiple timescales. So from what happened during the most recent week to the case in cases where you have long-term drought happening, looking out 1 year, 2 years, even 5 years in some cases. So how is the map made? I know this is going into probably a little bit more detail, but I find with the US Drought Monitor, there's always lots of questions about where the data come from and how the map is made. So I thought I'd spend just a minute talking about that. So we start out with an author. We currently have 10 authors from four national or regional centers. There's one located at the Western Regional Climate Center. Each author typically serves about a 2-week shift before it rotates to the next author. At the beginning of each week, the assigned author examines multiple sources of objective data. So that's soil moisture, that precipitation at different time scales. All of those go into a geographic information system so that we can layer the data on top of each other and that we can overlay the last week's map on it too to see where changes might be warranted. The author may also look at impact reports submitted by expert observers or people such as yourselves that help give context to the data that we're looking at. I'll talk a little bit more about these in the next segment of my talk. After looking at all of that data, the authors put out a draft of the map. We put out multiple drafts, usually at least 3, sometimes as many as 5. And those maps go to a group of local experts. So we have a listserv that has over 400 people on it. I know Steph is one of them on the listserv representing the state of Nevada. And these experts often have their own networks or committees that they consult within the state. So they look at those drafts, they send us feedback, sometimes just writing things out, often drawing on a map to tell us where they think changes are warranted based on what they're seeing and what they're hearing. After that, that final map is released to the public on Thursday mornings. After the map goes out to the public, it's used by the media and others. It's used to communicate drought information. Many others at either the individual, community, state, or federal level use it for a variety of purposes. One of the most notable and probably most relevant to all of you is that the USDA uses it as a trigger for several of its programs. Show some of those here. In fact, the 2008 and 2014 versions of the Farm Bill mandate the use of the Drought Monitor to identify areas available for the livestock forage program. It's also used as a fast track for emergency loans, and by using the US Drought Monitor, this has led to the delivery of more than $7 billion in aid and relief. Just to point out, I'm not going to go through how to use it, but if you have questions at any time, feel free to contact me personally and I can help you. Our center has created an eligibility tool that uses the Drought Monitor classifications and grazing periods to help determine if you're eligible for payments through the livestock forage program. If you want to learn more about the USDM and the USDA drought relief programs, the USDA Climate Hubs produced a 2-pager. I've put the link to that here. Also, the National Drought Mitigation website has a suite of tutorials that can help you learn more about the map and how it's made. The second set of tools that I'd like to bring to your attention is related to what we call condition monitoring. In condition monitoring, citizens capture their perception of drought at a specific place and time by submitting reports that either use a dry to wet scale like you see here, or just enter in reports describing local conditions, or even uploading photographs. These reports are archived and help provide context for the data that scientists use in monitoring drought or in researching drought. A couple of flavors of condition monitoring exist. The first is called COCORAS. It's kind of a mouthful, and it stands for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And this was initially developed in Colorado, and I should remember the year, but I can't remember off the top of my head, after a flood event in Fort Collins when they were trying to reconstruct what the actual rainfall during the flood was. Since then, it has expanded to include some drought monitoring information. COCORAS members use a standard rain gauge that's shown here to measure and report rainfall daily, but they can also submit drought impact reports. These reports show up on a map. You see the triangles here where it'll show in eastern New Mexico that we have reports of severely dry. And when you click on one of those, you can see what the observer has to say about the conditions in their area. The National Drought Mitigation Center also has their own system, and this is called Condition Monitoring Observation and Reports, or Help Us See More Drought. And this tool, if you are interested and you want to explore the website, has a bit more detail to it. First of all, it has a questionnaire that strives to put a temporal context to what you're telling us. So it says, first of all, how much experience do you have with conditions there? Basically, how long have you lived there? In some cases, we may see a report that says, this is the worst that I've ever experienced. Well, if you've only lived there 3 years, that doesn't tell us as much as someone whose family has been on the land and has been farming it for generations. And then it also asks things like, how many times have you seen conditions like this in the past? Realizing this is really small, but what it is basically a checklist where you can click to see to show what you're experiencing. So some of the examples are decreased stock weights, animal stress, mortality, other things like that. And finally, you can upload photographs and a description of what's going on. And all of these are archived for the public to use or for scientists to use. If you want to learn more about these, you can get to both of these tools through our website at droughtimpacts.unl.edu. And as always, you can contact me and I can point you to more information or help you out as well. The next tool is called My Range Log, and this is an online tool developed by the University of Arizona and was funded in part by the Southwest Climate Hub. And I have just heard of this tool myself, and so I went and played with it today, and I must say I'm pretty impressed with it. This tool brings together some cutting edge web technology, climate data, and visualization tools to help analyze cumulative precipitation observations from remote rangeland sites. And I do want to point out that I got the information for this part of the presentation from Mike Crimmins, who's an extension climatologist at the University of Arizona. One of the cool things about this tool, and Mike sent a screen capture showing from his site in his backyard, is that you can incorporate, you can upload your rainfall measurements from multiple rain gauges, and you can manage that data through the web-based or the phone app to generate precipitation summary reports. One thing that I think is really kind of neat is that it includes this application called a precipitation logbook generator. But what it does is it leverages long-term climate data to help put local observations from any rain gauge into a historical context. So for me as a drought monitor author, this is important, because if someone tells me that we only got 7 inches of rain last year, I may not know what that means for your location. So this can help tell us if that amount is above normal or below normal. And how you go about doing this is with the app, you set your location and then you select the dates that you want to look at. And it'll show you this graph that you see on the right. And this chart shows percentile ranks. So each line represents a different percentile. That basically will tell you how rare or common a cumulative total from your location is. So here's an example here that if you have your rain gauge data on there, and you can see kind of where it falls between those lines. So if this was your data for this time of year, it would say, okay, what you're experiencing is kind of a wet year compared to what's normal. You probably already know that, but someone like me who is living and working in Lincoln, Nebraska may not know that. And so that can help supplement reports of what's going on. Unlike with CocoRa's or other programs, you don't need a special rain gauge to use this My Rain Gauge Log app. You can use any gauge, or you can even build your own. The website includes links to University of Arizona extension publications to provide you with guidance on best practices for setting up a rain gauge and how to make your own rain gauge. You can view these publications and learn more about the My Range Log program by visiting their website. And the final tool that I'm going to talk about is called Grasscast. This tool, which is geared for ranchers and other grassland managers, indicates whether productivity in pounds per acre is likely to be above normal, near normal, or below normal in the upcoming growing season relative to the 30+ year history of their local data. You can view these grass forecast maps as a static image. Oops, kind of messed that up there. I've kind of blown up the scale so that you could see it. Or it also has a zoomable feature where you can zoom into individual pixels, which are about 6 miles by 6 miles square in size. And the maps are interpreted as a percent above or below an average. So for example, if we look at a location that's colored red, it says given the actual precipitation observed through August 31st, so the date of this map, the grassland production is estimated to be less than 30% of the 30-year average. on the zoomable map, you can click in on individual pixels and it'll bring up an amount and kind of give you that specific wording for what the map is telling you at that location. And we have a lot of tools or a lot of resources to help you learn more about it at the website, which is now housed at the National Drought Mitigation Center. So grasscast.unl.edu. You can find introductory videos, you can find tutorials and handouts and all sorts of information to help you use this tool and to learn more about it. And that is all that I have for you. And here's my email address. I'm working remotely, so I think the best way to get in touch with me is to shoot me an email if you've got any questions. And thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, a really nice overview of some of those quick tools. I can say, as someone who contributes to the Drought Monitor, getting some of those reports, especially from rural areas that don't have a lot of data, are really important flags for me to know that I should go and try to dig up whatever data I can from that area, and then try to highlight that area for the Drought Monitor author. Obviously, they're covering the whole country, and so sometimes those areas that don't necessarily have good data may not, and many rural areas don't, you know, might not be as accurate as they could be otherwise. And I have also seen Drought Monitor authors go to really great lengths to try and track down what's going on in some areas where there's not data, but they're getting reports that things are bad, and they want to make sure that drought is accurately represented.
And I 100% agree with Steph and appreciate her efforts. The very last time I was author, we did that. We dug into an area. I think it was was it Western? No, where was it? Somewhere in Nevada. I don't remember. Northwest?
Eastern Nevada, Northeast Nevada.
Northeast Nevada, see? I don't even remember where.
Right.
No data, and it took some work on both of our part and going back and forth to dig into that. And those reports are, you know, while we don't have time to read every individual report, it's something that I look up. It's something that's, you know, Steph or her equivalent in other part of the country looks at to help bring our attention to areas and help us get a closer look at it.
Eb, I really liked what you had to say about being a short-term observer. I have an acre, just an acre of forage, all Bermuda grass. Only water supply is surface water. And this is the third year I've been irrigating it. And it is so much worse than last year and the year before that I've been constantly cursing. I've been saying the drought monitor's missing us. But then I have to remind myself, well, yes, you are, because actually I'm in a little bit of a kind of rain shadow area in Radium Springs, New Mexico. But also remind myself of the statistics that, yeah, this is bad, but I only know 3 years personally. And I guess the other thing I wanted to mention was CocoRa's gauges, and I put it in the chat box, but I have, I think, about 40 or maybe 50 CocoRa's gauges. And so if anybody would like to become a CocoRa's observer, I can send you gauges and we can go through a real quick training so you don't have to watch all the long videos or anything, and I can get you started as a CocoRa's observer.
And Katie, I don't know if you know this, but I actually helped start CocoRa's in New Mexico in 2005 when I was working there as the assistant state climatologist. And now we have CocoRa's in all 50 states and the territories, but at the time, New Mexico was just the 5th state to to join COCORAS, and we actually were working in observers from El Paso too, even though they were Texas, because Texas wasn't ready to join. So we were going down there and doing training and entering them in with New Mexico as part of New Mexico. So
even though we're probably about the same age, you're like my COCORAS mama.
Grandma. So just a little FYI. And just a note on the drought monitor, you know, we do the best that we can with it. We just don't have the data to get down to that individual field level with it. We're just not there. You know, I've heard, and many of you have probably heard this, that the drought monitor is like the gold standard of drought monitoring. And when people say that, I have to remind myself that we know that it's not perfect. And if you're ever someone who has received livestock forage program payments or didn't get the number of payments that you thought you should, I just want you to know that we recognize that the map's not perfect, but I think what makes it the best tool is that it incorporates that human component to it. A lot of times we'll get asked, well, why can't you just use a computer algorithm? Well, to us, that computer component is really important because, or that human component is really important because it does help draw our attention to areas. And the other thing that makes the drought monitor a good tool for the job is that it's constantly evolving. The drought monitor was developed 20 years ago, but the drought monitor that you see today isn't this. I mean, it looks the same. We still have the categories, but what goes into it, there's so much more information that goes into it now. I think when they started, they had maybe 8 of those expert observers, and now we have over 400. So we're constantly evolving to do the best job that we can.
I have a quick comment in that I've used the drought monitor tool for many years, not only as a rancher, but as a manager of the Rio Grande Water Conservation District up here. We use that a lot to determine how we deliver water under the compact to the downstream states. And so it's very important, and it has gotten better over the years. And I did notice that on the grass snap chart that you had up on your screen there a while ago, that was I believe September 1st or 2nd. And there's one little green spot out east of Colorado Springs. And fortunately, that's where our cows landed about that time. So I didn't realize how widespread, what a small spot that was.
Right.
How fortunate we are to be there.
And when we, and as someone who works in drought monitoring, when I see something like that, the first thing I do is like, okay, that can't be real. So, there's no way that's real, you know? And so then we start digging into it in both ways to see,
it's real.
To see if it is or it isn't.
A bit of rain right there, just in one little streak. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how it works, but that's how it does quite often.
That's what makes our job so hard. And yours, too. Anyone else have questions for me? And if you think of them later, feel free to shoot me an email or an email that just says, can you call me? And I can call you too. I'm happy to talk with anyone about the drought monitor or any of the products and things that I've shown today.
All right. So yeah, that was a really wonderful presentation. And so if anyone had any last questions or comments before we wrapped up for today. I don't know, Peter or Ian, I know neither of you have had a chance, either Peter or Ann or Ian have had a chance to ask questions if you wanted to kind of sneak one in.
Yes, I have one other question about sort of all these data collection tools. What would you say to someone who's like, you know, what does this matter? Like, I can look outside and see what's happening. Like, why is it important for people to be contributing data?
You know, we get, we call it fan mail like that a lot, that says, well, it rained here, the drought's over. And while one rain might make the grass a little greener, it doesn't help with those long-term deficits that you might have. And I would let someone like George, who has way more experience than me talk about that in terms about the importance of the effect of those long-term shortages on your land. That's the best I can do.
I think also with the Grasscast tool, because that is updated every 2 weeks and it's an estimate of the annual forage production. So, you know, it does get better, of course, throughout the season because it relies on observed precipitation, but it's helpful, I think, in thinking about, so if the rainfall is less than normal, is average, or is more than normal, this is what forage will look like on this piece of land. And especially if you do have those communities or relationships like George and Julie were talking about, maybe
Yes.
you can sort of think about, you know, let's move these some other place. You know, can I move the cattle some other place, or what might I want to be thinking about this season if forage is going to look this way. So I think with Grasscast, because it's a little bit of a predictive tool, it can help in that way.
Excellent point.
The range of Grasscast.
I didn't hear that.
I just said, what determines the range of Grasscast? Like, it's this particular strip through the West, but like I see that, like, I mean, I'm asking because I'm biased, because it's like the county, it seems to come up just east of us where we are. So
yeah, the footprint. So it was developed in the Northern Plains out of Colorado State University 2 years ago. And then we moved it, it expanded to the Southern Plains because that was, they had similar predictive relationships between rainfall and forage production. And so it was a pretty easy move. And then this year, it's taken a little bit of a change in the approach, but it's expanded to Arizona and New Mexico. So the range is determined partially by using those clippings and evapotranspiration relationships, and I won't get into the details, but there's a modeling component and 38 years of historical precipitation to kind of show you the history, like how forage production relates to this year, relates to the historic precipitation. So it's growing. Basically, the answer is it's expanding. It hasn't come to that part of Colorado yet because they're working on those relationships, but that might be an area that it moves to next. Good question. Did that answer your question?
yes, thank you.
All right. Well, then I actually wanted to really thank everyone, the presenters, but especially our mentors and attendees. This was both other people have brought this up, a fascinating but also a really moving conversation. And like Katie Steele, I'm also encouraged to kind of try to pitch in and figure out what need, right? Figure out how we can help. Just a final thank you to everyone, and I hope everyone has plans for a nice evening.